if I want to pass the information from calling function to called function, in that time I'm going to use variables. The function's formal arguments are also considered as local variable. I'm going to print the value within this block itself. That means I'm not going to return the value. For that reason, my return type here is void. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on programming in C, and the chapter name here is User Defined Function. I am Revati from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So dear student, before going to start my today's session, let's recall the topic which I have covered in my last session. So dear student, I started with definition, that is nothing but what is user defined function. Along with that, I have covered function definition or structure of a function. That means the syntax of user defined function. Along with that, I have discussed how to call a function, how to return a function. Along with that, I have discussed how to create function prototype, and all these things are very important from the examination point of view. But in my today's session, I'm going to deal with the different types of arguments. Along with that, I'm going to deal with the type of function. So dear student, what are you waiting for? Please make a point during my explanation, because once again these are the very important topic from the examination point of view. Anyway, dear student, let's see the first topic of today's session. So what is variable here? Variables are used to hold the value. There is nothing but variables are nothing but the name given to the memory location. That means when I define any variable, that is directly going to point the memory location. For example, if I write int a, now think that this is my memory and A is going to point the memory. That means I'm going to give the name to the memory location, and in that memory location I'm going to store the value. For example, if I write A equal to 100, where I'm going to store 100 in my memory location. Now I can able to access this 100 with the help of A or with the help of memory address. So here a variable in a function header is called arguments. That means whatever the variables I'm going to use in my function header is called arguments. Before that, tell me what is function header. That is nothing but return type along with the function name, along with the parameters together called function header. And what are the variables I'm going to use in my function header is known as arguments. And the arguments are used to pass the information. Suppose if I want to pass the information from calling function to called function, in that time I'm going to use variables. So it is called by the function. That means the arguments are used to pass the information from the calling function to called function. Now I'm going to have different type of argument. Anyway, a function call statement contains name of the function and list of argument to be processed. That means what is function call here? That means I'm going to call a function. How? That is, for example, add and if I pass 10, 20, then it is known as function call. When I call the function that contains name of the function, so this is the name of the function, along with that I'm going to pass the argument or I'm going to pass the value, and these arguments or parameters are called actual argument. So what is my first type of argument? It is actual argument, and where I'm going to use actual argument in my function call. For example, if I write add a comma b, so here a and b are nothing but the actual argument. So here a and b are nothing but the actual argument. Now the argument can be constant. That means I can able to pass constant value, or even I can able to pass the variables, or even I can able to pass the expression. Now this is the example. So here biggest is nothing but my function name, and I'm going to pass a, B, C. Instead of A, B, C, even I can able to pass constant value 10, 20 and 30. So both are valid. Now I'm going to have my second type of argument, that is formal argument, where I can able to use formal argument in my called function. So dear student, the function header contains return type, specifier, function name along with the argument declaration. So what is function header here? That includes return type of the function along with function name along with parameter list. Now let me to consider the syntax here. I'm going to have the return type, then I'm going to have function name, along with that I'm going to have argument list, and all these three together referred as function header. Now these arguments are called formal argument. So whatever the argument I'm going to use in my function header is called formal argument or dummy argument, and formal arguments gets their value from the actual argument. That means when I define this statement in my program, whatever the variables I'm going to have, all these variables are dummy variable, and they're going to get the values from the calling function. So where they're going to get the values from the calling function, and this type of argument is known as formal parameter. Moving further, I'm going to have another type of variable, that is local variable. So the name itself indicates that is local to the program or local to the function. That means the scope of local variable within the function or within the main program. So dear student, the variable which is declared inside the function or blocks is said to be local variable. That means whatever the variable I'm going to declare within the function or within the block, and that variable can be used between that block. I cannot able to access those variables outside the block. These variables are called local variables. So dear student, the values of local variables are accessible only in that block. Now the functions formal arguments are also considered as local variable. Now, if I consider the formal variables which is present in the function is also treated as local variable. For example, this is my function name and I'm going to have the arguments. Along with that, I'm going to have the variables inside the function and it is treated as local variables. Moving further, I'm going to have global variables. So, the function variables or the variables that is declared outside the function or outside the main function is called global variables. So, what is global variable? The variable which is declared outside the main function is called global variables, so that the program can able to access the global variables. That means the scope of the global variable is throughout the program. These variables are referred by the same data type and same name throughout the program in both calling function as well as called function. For example, if I use global variables in my program, then while calling function and in my called function, I can able to use same variable name. If some variables are treated as same value in both main program as well as in other function, and it's also called as global variables. That means there are certain time I want to use same variables in my program as well as in my function. That time it's better to go with the global variables. So this is the syntax I'm going to have here. So dear student, I'm going to define the variable at the beginning, that means above the main program, and I'm going to have the data type int and I'm going to have the variables called a and b. Now I can able to use these a and b throughout the program, and here I'm going to have int p and q. So this is nothing but the local variable and the scope of the variables are within the main function. Anyway, dear student, these are the 4 different types of arguments. What are the 4 different types of argument? That is actual argument, then formal argument, local variable as well as global variable. Moving further, I'm going to have types of function. So here functions are categorized into 4 types. Along with that, I'm going to have recursive function. So total how many type of function? It is 5 type of function. So what are the different type of function I'm going to have here? That is function with no argument and no return type. Next type, function with arguments and no return type. Now I'm going to have function with no arguments and with return type or return value, and function with arguments as well as return values, and the last function here is recursive function. And dear student, please make a note here that this topic is very important from the examination point of view, and you can able to expect one question from this topic. Now I'm going to have my first type. So what is my first type? Function with no argument and with return type. What is the name of the function? I have no argument. That means my function does not receive any argument, but still it's going to return the value. See here, I'm going to have the syntax here. According to the topic name, it's going to return the value, and I have my function, but I don't have any arguments, and I have certain set of statement. Along with that, I'm going to have return value. That means that this function is going to return some value. Now, let me to consider the example here. So here, I'm going to have the return type, that is integer, and I'm going to have the function name called greatest, and I don't have any arguments. Now, here I'm going to check if A greater than B. If this condition is true, then what I want to return? I want to return A. Else, I want to return B. Now, moving further, I'm going to have my second type of function, that is functions with arguments and with return type. That means here I'm going to have the function, but my function will have argument. At the same time, it's going to have the return type. That means my function is able to accept argument. At the same time, it is responsible for returning the value. So, dear student, I have return type along with my function name and along with the arguments. And I'm going to have set of statement. Along with that, I'm going to have return value. That means I'm going to return some value to the calling function. Now, this is the simple example I'm going to have. That is, I want to find the interest. So, what is my function name? It is interest, and I'm going to return the value. And what type of value? It is float. For that reason, my return type here is float. And I'm going to have the set of argument. Now, I'm going to perform the calculation, and at the end, I'm going to return the simple interest to the calling function. Now, I'm going to have my third type of function, that is function with arguments and no return type. So, as the function name indicates that I'm going to have the argument, but I'm not going to return the value. So, here, this is the example I'm going to have here. So, this is the general syntax I'm going to have here. I'm going to have the return type, then function name as well as argument list. So, dear student, please remember here that according to the function name, it does not return any value. So, this function does not return any value. So, what is my return type here? That is nothing but void. And I'm going to have the function name along with the parameter list. See the difference here. I don't have any return statement because I'm not going to return any value. Now, if I consider this example, see here, same function, but what is the difference? I don't have any return type. So, it is void. Interest is nothing but my function name, and I'm going to have the formal arguments PTR. And I'm going to find the simple interest, and at the same time, I'm going to display the simple interest. Moving further, I'm going to have my last type of function, that is function with no argument and no return type. That means I'm going to have the function, but I'm not going to receive the argument, even I'm not going to return the value. So, here this is the general form. I have return type along with the function name, but I'm not going to receive any parameters, and I'm going to have this statement. See here, I don't have any return statement because I'm not going to return any value to the calling function. Now, dear student, let me to consider the example here that I'm going to have the function name called greatest, and I'm not going to receive any arguments. At the same time, I'm not going to return any value. For that reason, here return type is void, and I'm going to have this statement. That means I'm going to check if A greater than B. If this condition is true, I just want to print A. Else, I just want to print B. So, I'm going to print the value within this block itself. That means I'm not going to return the value. For that reason, my return type here is void. So, dear student, these are the 4 different types of functions. So, dear student, these are the 4 different types of functions. Anyway, dear student, in my today's session, I started with the different types of arguments like actual argument, formal argument, local variable as well as global variable. Along with that, I have covered the different types of function. But in my next session, I'm going to deal with the structures. Until that, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.